Hello, everybody. Welcome to our joint press call. I'm going to keep my comments short and I'm going to jump right into introducing Representative Teresa Ledger Fernandez. Hello, Congresswoman.
Hello, and thank you all for joining us once again, as you did last week. We do believe it is really important to address New Mexicans in these important moments. Today, House Republicans elected Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House. What do we know about Mr. Johnson, our new Speaker? We know that he supports a nationwide abortion ban. He's an architect of the effort to overturn the 2020 election. He's repeatedly called to privatize Social Security. He voted against keeping the government open 3 weeks ago. He won this position after almost a month of chaos and turmoil, where moderate Republican candidates were quickly derailed and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, or former President Trump spoke against them. Speaker Johnson's extreme proposals would hurt New Mexico and the country. His conference pushed a partisan agricultural appropriations bill that would cut funding to 2007 levels. How can a mother feed her kids with a budget from 2007? They want to take food from the mouths of babies and children and income from the pockets of our local farmers and ranchers. Their agricultural proposal would also cut funds for electric co-ops. That would raise energy prices for about 268,403 residents in New Mexico's 3rd District. These kind of proposals are bad for New Mexicans. Speaker Johnson's conference would cut essential investments in American children instead of making sure that the richest corporations and individuals pay their fair share in taxes. They will defend the rich and powerful corporations, while we Democrats push to bring down the costs for our New Mexican families, like bringing down healthcare and drug costs. However, it is a new page, and we are hopeful. We urge the new Speaker and the Republicans to abandon their extreme ideas and instead work on a bipartisan fashion with Democrats to pass laws that actually help New Mexico communities. With that, I'd now like to hand it over to my hermana from New Mexico, Representative Melanie Stansberry.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez, and good afternoon to everyone back home in New Mexico. We are here today on the 22nd day since the former speaker was unseated by extremists in the House GOP, and after 19 rounds of votes this year for a speaker, the House GOP has finally re-elected a new speaker to reopen the House. I think it's important for folks to understand that Mike Johnson does not represent a departure from the chaos and the extremism that we've seen from the GOP over the last 10 months, but in fact, a new chapter and possibly a more extreme version of what we've seen to date. In fact, if you look at Mike Johnson's record, he was, as Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez said, an architect of Trump's efforts to steal the 2020 election. He has been an ardent election denier. He was part of the team that defended Donald Trump in his first impeachment and his illegal activities while sitting in the presidency. And he's also been an anti-LGBTQ plus and an anti-abortion advocate his entire career. We are deeply troubled by the election of Mr. Johnson, and we are fearful about what kinds of policies he will bring to the floor over the coming months. But what is also important is to understand that New Mexico's delegation has been united in our efforts to reopen the House, to try to chart a bipartisan path forward, and to ensure that we continue to serve the people of New Mexico. And so we are here. We are going to work every single day now that the House is reopened to address the needs that we know every single New Mexican is facing right now. And with that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Gabe Vasquez.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and thank you to everybody who's on the call with us today. I do just want to remind folks that this is the Republican, this is the fifth choice for Speaker. So, you know, we've been through it for the last 3 weeks with so much chaos and dysfunction here, and the best they could do was their fifth choice for Speaker. And so instead of accepting the Democrats' olive branch and choosing to work side by side with us on a bipartisan basis to reopen the House, Republicans chose extremism and chaos. And this is nothing new. This is what we've seen out of what is now the MAGA Republican House. We know who is still in control. Now, Mike Johnson has all of the same extreme elements as Jim Jordan did, perhaps with less name recognition. I just want to remind folks in New Mexico that Mike Johnson is an election denier. He wants to cut Social Security and Medicare, which would deeply hurt seniors in all three of our districts. He is anti-reproductive rights, and he's co-sponsored several bills banning abortion nationwide without exceptions. He also authored the federal Don't Say Gay bill, proposed cutting funding for the FBI and law enforcement. He thinks climate change is a hoax, and he believes that January 6th was a peaceful protest. Now, during a very important time when we need to support our allies overseas, he's also somebody that has voted against aid for Ukraine and voted for a government shutdown. And so as the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson is and should be expected to follow the principles of unity, of cooperation, of effective governance. However, his positions and his extremist and controversial agenda since he's been in Congress show us that instead he's more interested in promoting division. The American people deserve better. They deserve leadership that's willing to work across the aisle, that reflects our values all across this country and in New Mexico, and that advances policies that will truly improve the quality of life through some very trying both domestic and international times. And so in a very divided government, bipartisanship is still the best way forward, both to fund the government in this upcoming budget fight that we're going to have internally that's going to require us to work together and to tackle the key priorities like lowering the cost of goods for New Mexicans, making sure that we're growing the middle class, making sure that we don't cut social programs like SNAP and food safety for our most vulnerable populations, and that we keep Social Security and Medicare intact. Thank you so much. With that, I will pass it back over to Felicia.
Thank you very much, Congressman. My first question is from Nicole Maxwell from the New Mexico Political Report. Is there enough time to pass the needed appropriations bills to keep the government open, or will there be another stopgap?
I'll begin and then turn it on down the line. We will need a continuing resolution since they have taken up almost a month of the time from the last continuation in their chaos and dysfunction. We will still need to get a continuing resolution as a stopgap measure. And so we'll need to be doing that, and then we'll see how we can get those appropriations bills done. We are looking to the Senate to continue its work. What we want, though, is to make sure that they live up to the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We need to remember that we already passed a bill that laid out the framework for our appropriations and that said what the top numbers were. We just need to pass into that. And that's why I pointed out the problems with what they've been doing is instead of honoring that law, which they voted for. Mike Johnson voted for this. So we're going to see if he stays true to his pledge, his vote, is they've been cutting those numbers. So that's why we are very concerned. We anticipate there was a schedule given out that looks at how the appropriations bills will come up. We anticipate that instead of being home in New Mexico, I plan to be down in Hobbs and Lovington on Monday and Tuesday. I'm going to be here in DC looking at those appropriations bills is what we expect. And there's a schedule that will take us actually into 2024 under Speaker Johnson's proposal of when we'll get these bills finally done.
And I'll just follow up on that. So Congressman Johnson did release a memo today, a Dear Colleagues letter, where he laid out his vision for the agenda going forward, which does include a week-by-week look at priority legislation, including the appropriations bills. But as Congresswoman Ledger-Fernandez said, it's impossible to get through each individual appropriations bill by the November 17th deadline. So what is likely to happen is there will be a continuing resolution. We understand that their intention, the GOP's intention, is to take us into the new year with a continuing resolution. And I want to highlight that this has potentially devastating impacts for our communities, because there was in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which was negotiated with President Biden in May, requirements for what's called sequestration or across the board cuts in agency budgets if they did not pass a budget in time. Now, one might say, oh, this is just an accident. They didn't intend to do that. But As we know, many of the folks on the GOP would like to see our agencies gutted, and this is a de facto way to cause across the board cuts to all of our programs. I think it's worth noting here as well that not only is Johnson going to be the architect of this effort to cut our programs, he also supports cutting Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and he voted against the PACT Act, which is the most significant legislation to support our veterans and expand healthcare for our veterans ever in American history. So we are in for a rocky road ahead. Hopefully we won't see a shutdown in the immediate future, but we are likely to see devastating cuts to the budget. Gabe?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And absolutely, I share your sentiments, and I understand what Republicans are trying to do. It's going to have an impact on New Mexicans. We're looking at the expiration of the Farm Bill, for example, at the end of the year. And to me, it's deeply troubling sitting on the Agriculture Committee that we cannot get to the business of governing for our rural communities. And that includes some of the most important programs that help support ranchers and farmers, but also food assistance programs like SNAP and WIC, TANF, and others. That is dangerous. You are playing with people's lives at this point, and the ability for them to feed their families. Secondly, what we're seeing is also Republicans trying to dismantle what was done in the last Congress. There's a lot of appropriations out there right now that have yet to hit the ground for things like the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that it's going to be hard for agencies to actually start to allocate some of these dollars. One, if we face a government shutdown, but two, certainly if we can't get to the business of appropriating these to specific programs and ensuring that the continuity of this funding. And perhaps that's their strategy, that's their playbook. But I can tell you that the only people that are going to suffer from this dysfunction are going to be the American people, who already decided in the last Congress how to spend these dollars and how they're going to benefit our communities.
Next question from Kathy Cook with the Albuquerque Journal. What will House Democrats' top priority be now that there's a new speaker? Is there any legislation that urgently needs to be passed?
You want to take that, Melanie, first, and then we'll do a little round robin on how we answer these?
Yeah, so I think, obviously the first order of business is to get back to regular legislative order within the House. The Speaker's gavel was passed to the new Speaker less than an hour ago, and our understanding is that they plan to bring legislation to the floor this afternoon. It's important for the public to understand that Democrats are in the minority right now, and so that means we don't control the legislative agenda, because in the House, it's a winner-take-all kind of program where leadership and the majority really control what comes to the floor. Now, every one of us on this call today have been working in a bipartisan manner to advance legislation for New Mexicans. In fact, over the last several weeks myself, I've introduced several pieces of bipartisan legislation on veterans issues, on water issues. I know Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez has been working on bipartisan legislation associated with women in leadership in the agricultural industry. Representative Vasquez has been working with our Armed Services Committee to get legislation through on issues related to our active duty and veterans. But, really at the end of the day, this is still the MAGA Congress, and we will be beholden to whatever they see fit to bring to the floor. But we will do everything we can to address the needs of New Mexicans and to work in a bipartisan manner.
And I'll just add, Congresswoman, that working on the National Defense Authorization Act and the appropriations bill that comes with it, the Senate is passing its own version of those bills and is sending it to conference with the House. And so that's also incredibly critical for our national security. And so we will see if the new Speaker Johnson can actually negotiate in good faith with the Senate and with the administration on these bills to take out these toxic riders that MAGA Republicans put in under the last speakership that are going to be a non-starter with Democrats in the House. That's critically important. And I've been waiting to introduce a package of bills on immigration as well since I've gotten here. Been studying this issue incredibly closely and drawing on from my own experiences to bring forth meaningful bipartisan legislation. And so for our office, we're definitely looking at both ways that we can support bipartisan bills that are coming out of offices like the Congresswomen, and as well introduce our own bills to tackle the domestic issues that really matter to people, and immigration is one of those.
So, and then finally, I will wrap it up in that we anticipate that we will need to take up 2 supplemental bills because there's an urgent need to get funding right now, and so there's a international security and humanitarian bill, and I think it's important to say that it includes both security and humanitarian for both Ukraine, which is key because we need to remember that a vote against the Ukraine aid is a vote for Putin. It's a vote for authoritarianism. It is a vote for Russia and what they represent, which is undermining democracy, not just in Ukraine, but across the world. And then supporting Israel, but also providing the humanitarian need that is essential in Gaza and in other places, not just those. So there'll be a security and humanitarian supplemental that is now being discussed in the Senate. And then there will be a domestic supplemental, things that need to be done immediately. And in that is a range of things that need to be done, from disaster relief. We know that very well in New Mexico, how important it is to get disaster relief out quickly, but also things like we are facing the child care cliff, where the American Rescue Plan funds are running out, and we would have hundreds of childcare facilities at risk of closing if we don't address that childcare cliff. That's in the domestic supplemental. So there are those 2 supplementals that need to get passed quickly to address these pressing, urgent, emergency needs, and then moving forward on getting that continuing resolutions so we don't shut down on November 17th.
Next question from Algernon from the Deming Headlight. Is the caucus concerned that under this new speaker, there may be renewed risk to election integrity? And what might be the procedural response?
I can start there, and I can certainly say, speaking from my own experience, one of the reasons I ran for the seat was how troubled I was by what had happened with the erosion of democracy when it comes to our voting rights, and so many extreme MAGA Republicans voting to decertify the elections in states that they didn't even represent. I can tell you that there is some palpable fear, because Mike Johnson was one of the architects of the philosophy that really gave clearance to so many Republicans to vote for this, which inspired, of course, the riots that we saw here on January 6th. And so there is a worry that he will continue this ideology, and his leadership could further erode the voting rights that we are seeing attacked in states all across the country. And so we hope that he won't feel that fire, but he has a history as an election denier and as an architect of January 6th of being in that political position.
I would add that there is a concern. We do know that we passed the House administration, the Electoral Count Act in the 117th to make sure that we closed up some of the really egregious loopholes that I will say that now Speaker Johnson sought to exploit. As they say, he was the architect. It was, as legal scholars describe the brief that he wrote to the Supreme Court to try to get this through, that it was dangerous. I think they used the term trash, but they said, but dangerous trash, right? Because it was scary. Like what they were trying to do in terms of giving to the House of Representatives the right to overturn an election is very troublesome. Once again, we are hoping that there will be enough of the moderate Republicans who hold firm on saying we cannot let this happen. If you were on the floor of the House today, when Chair Aguilar was talking about the concerns of election integrity, and he raised these issues, shouts from the Republicans were, that's exactly why we wanted him. I mean, there were shouts of support for the fact that he was the architect of the overturning the 2020 election of the brief. So there are many on that side of the aisle who still hold firm to the idea that Trump should be the president now, regardless of what the people voted on. And one thing is to say, he was my candidate, I wish he would have won. Another thing to say is, he was my candidate, we shall make him president regardless of the election results. And that is the concern that we hold. Once again, we are hoping it's a new day. He has said some of the right things on the bench. Let's work with him. We are open to working on that bipartisan basis to protect this beautiful but fragile democracy that we hold dear.
You know, and I'll just add to this. Don't be fooled by Mike Johnson's demeanor. He is Donald Trump's Speaker of the House. We've just now gone through 4 separate candidates for Speaker of the House. And let's remember how we got here. 22 days ago, Matt Gaetz, Donald Trump's ally, who had called for the impeachment of our sitting president over conspiracy theories that had been peddled by Rudy Giuliani, stood up on the House floor and took out then Speaker McCarthy. Then, weeks later, they put up another potential set of candidates. It was clear Donald Trump wouldn't support those candidates. And also Jim Jordan was so extreme and so questionable as the character of his representation. He was a non-starter even within his own caucus. Then yesterday, after multiple rounds and closed door meetings inside the Republican caucus, the House GOP chose a moderate to be their speaker. And what happened? Donald Trump took to Truth Social and took that moderate out. And that is how we ended up with Mike Johnson, one of Donald Trump's closest allies, as the Speaker of the House. While he seems like a very gentle person, and of course he said all the right things today standing on the dais, his record is very clear. He is an attorney that has worked for extremist organizations, gutting reproductive rights. He is an extremist attorney who has tried to gut LGBTQ plus rights. He is an extremist representative who tried to decertify the 2020 election. He is an extremist partner in Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election, and he is going to be one of the most extreme speakers of the House that we have probably ever seen. So I think it's important that, yes, I think there are real fears that this could stoke continued problems with our institutions. He has already stated internally in his caucus that it is his intention to continue with the conspiracy-laden impeachment inquiries that the House Judiciary Committee has already been conducting. And I think we can expect more of the same, notwithstanding what we saw on the dais today.
Next question comes from Morgan Lee from AP. Speaker Johnson said, "We must come together and address the broken border." Do you think there is any common ground between Democrats and leading Republicans in that area? And or what do you make of that comment?
Well, if you allow me to start here, I think that we have tried to do comprehensive immigration reform in this country for quite some time and haven't had any significant progress on this since the Reagan years and the years of IRCA. And when we did have a chance and we had a bipartisan bill in the Senate that passed the Senate in 2013, then former Speaker Boehner, Republican Speaker Boehner, killed the bill. And so if Republicans are serious about dealing with the issues and the challenges that we currently face from the humanitarian crisis at our southern border, then they need to come and work across the aisle with Democrats. There's nothing and there's no way that they're going to pass in the House that's going to make it through the Senate or that's going to make it through the administration without the president vetoing it. And so if they want to get serious, both they have to work with our Senate colleagues, with the administration, and with a bipartisan support in the House. And so I'm not optimistic that Speaker Johnson is going to be one of the leading voices to help bring us together on this issue. However, there are some smaller things that I believe that we can agree to, that we can pass, that address things like the fentanyl crisis, that address things like conditions at detention centers, that address things like scanning technology at our ports of entry. There's some common sense things that I think we can do together. And so I will be optimistic for now. We are going to introduce some of those proposals, and we look forward to seeing how far they're actually willing to work in a bipartisan way to solve some of these common sense issues.
And so we will also be seeing in the supplemental coming in some provisions that I would be very interested to see if the Republicans support. There is money in the supplemental to increase immigration officers, because we know one of the things that happens is you get these backlogs, and so therefore cases don't go forward. We're not processing because, as Representative Vasquez has pointed out, for years they have been undermining the immigration system rather than supporting it. And so there is in the supplemental money to increase the immigration officers so that you can move through those. There is significant money in the supplemental to address fentanyl. I want to see our Republicans actually support those, because we know that in the past few months, they have actually voted to cut funding for fentanyl interdiction. They've voted to cut funding for Border Patrol. You know, I pointed out earlier today in a hearing we were having that too often they want to actually have the problem exist and not solve it because it's a political culture. I want us to say, be very honest about what the problem is, what the root causes are, and try to start fixing it. And they'll have an opportunity in the supplemental. I don't like everything in there, but there are some things that will help that we will be supporting, and we'll see if Republicans can address that. And I also want to talk about something with regards to borders. I know that Representative Stansbury is firm against this, and Representative Vasquez has led on the issue of, when we talk about borders, that we have states like Texas that are creating a border between two states with their concertina wire. We have communities like Lubbock County that is seeking to prevent women from traveling to New Mexico, right? That they are creating an internal border, which I believe is unconstitutional, to prevent free access and travel for certain individuals, women, people who might look like they're immigrants, which could be any of us, right? So we need to also look at saying, take down those walls, take down those concertina wires, and horrible policies that would seek to prevent women from traveling from state to state.
And I'll just add here, and I think this will incorporate some of the questions that have come in since this question about opportunities for bipartisan work on border and immigration issues. Listen, Democrats have been trying for decades to get bipartisan immigration reform across the finish line. We know the solutions: a pathway to citizenship, funding programs that help address the backlog in our courts and the asylum system, addressing the infrastructure needs of communities where they're being inundated by the humanitarian crisis on the border. And what we have seen is a continued inaction by the Republican Party to in earnest take up meaningful bipartisan legislation. And the reason why is because it's a very potent political issue for them in mobilizing the base. Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez and I sat just earlier today in a hearing in the Natural Resources Committee that should have nothing to do with border and immigration issues, and listened to the nativist, xenophobic, and racist rhetoric of our colleagues across the aisle who are pushing for legislation that is a non-starter for Democrats, that would worsen the issues on the border, and that would actually harm our communities economically in terms of behavioral health and well-being, and would actually harm the safety of our communities. And so there is tons of opportunity for bipartisan work on this issue, but we have to have a willing partner who's not just going in front of Fox News and yelling talking points to their base, who's actually willing to work on real legislation. And we have yet to actually see that happen. I think this leads into the supplemental that there was some additional questions on. I believe that there has been some public fact sheets put out about the supplemental, but we'll follow up with any information that we have. And I think it's important for everyone to know President Biden addressed the nation last week, and he unveiled his supplemental package that did include both this international humanitarian aid and military package, as well as addressing these domestic issues, including border issues and the fentanyl crisis here in the United States. And yes, we are fearful that Ukrainian aid could be threatened by the new speaker because he has publicly said that he was opposed to it. I'm hopeful that this supplemental, because it has been well received and supported in the Senate by Republicans, will be supported here in the House. But this will really test, I think, the new alliance that this speaker has put together as to whether or not he's going to do the right thing and advance the needs of the American people.
So I think we've run out of time for questions. Representative Stansbury touched answers on the other ones. So I'll just sort of do a real quick closing and pass it back over to my colleagues. I'll go to Gabe and Melanie after me. But thank you for participating. We wanted to make sure that New Mexicans understood the importance of what happened today, but also what it means for New Mexico and those important programs that we rely on, and why we are concerned about a speaker who came to this position after weeks and weeks of them tearing down all of the moderate nominees that they had, and what that could mean in terms of what he has actually said, what it means for the communities that we love, which is all of our beautiful New Mexico communities, whether you're LGBTQ, whether you're living along the border, whether you're a rancher and farmer, and so many of mine are ranchers and farmers, they are going after your livelihood. We want to make sure you know it. They're going after your food, your nutrition, double up bucks, all of that stuff. It is scary. And so what we're going to do is keep letting you know what this means, what is happening in DC, and how it affects your life in New Mexico. And so keep reaching out to our offices with your concern. As we always say, we're the WD-40. We're here to hear from you, to listen to you. Please keep doing that, and we'll keep keeping you informed. We can actually send out the supplementals to the people who RSVP'd to this conference so that you have that. And I'll go to Gabe next.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and thank you all for being here with us today. As the Congresswoman mentioned, we've got some work to do, and I really am optimistic and hoping that we can get some bipartisan things done before the next Congress, because we spend a lot of time being very thoughtful about the policies and the efforts of the administration and working with our Senate colleagues that benefit New Mexicans. And so we're going to continue to work just as hard to make sure that our policies and our priorities are included. Again, the Farm Bill is so incredibly important. You know, USDA rural development programs that help feed our country, that help build houses in rural communities for farm workers, that provide food assistance, so critically important for New Mexico and our rural communities. That has to be a bipartisan effort. Our National Defense Authorization Act and the appropriations bill for that, which we'll be taking up as well, also critically important to supporting not just national defense, but our military families in places like Holloman Air Force Base and White Sands Missile Range and Kirtland Air Force Base, Clovis over at Canada. That's so critically important. And so we're going to continue to bring home results for New Mexicans, even in this very tough environment that we have and that we face politically, with some very extreme elements of the Republican Party that have taken over essentially the speaker's gavel. Those are the folks who are now in charge. But we're going to continue to work hard. I'm going to continue to work hard for our constituents here in CD2. And it is a coordinated effort between our three offices and, of course, our Senate delegation. Thank you so much.
And I'll just add to say, you will not find a more unified and dedicated delegation than the three of us who work hand in hand every single day for our communities across New Mexico. We represent every single community across our state, from our Indigenous and our Latino and our Black and our Asian American and our communities in the rural areas and the urban areas, the border areas, and of course our Indigenous nations. And we are here to serve every single day. So if you all need anything, please reach out to us. We are here to help and to support our communities.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you to Congresswoman Ledger-Fernandez, Congressman Vasquez, and of course, Congresswoman Stansbury for being here. If anybody needs anything else, please reach out to our respective offices, but have a good day. Bye.